We all will be discussing the various ways New York State Parks and Historic Preservation are broadening our interpretive approach going forward of telling the full history of individuals and communities throughout the state. In saying that, we're all happy to be here, and Cordell, you can take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda. I just wanted to talk for a bit about some of the work we've been doing in the interpretation unit. A lot of what I do as a professional is helping our sites to tell their stories, but we have a wide variety of properties across the state, 250 state parks and historic sites. We have history that covers everything from Dutch settlement, slavery, indigenous peoples, Revolutionary War, all the way up even beyond the Gilded Age, I would say even into World War I and World War II out at Fort Ontario State Historic Park. And in that broad swath of history, I think we have been caught in what a lot of museums and historic sites have done in the past, which is focus on one single narrative. So you get the story of the great person who is associated with that site, their namesake. What you don't get is a balanced, inclusive story that includes all the people who were there, whether they be indigenous people, enslaved people, free Africans, the women of the family, or other people who may have interacted there, whether they be tenant farmers. We're trying to move away slowly from focusing on this hero narrative and present something to the public, which is a more realistic, a more humanized version of actual history. And it's really good history because the primary narrative approach doesn't really serve telling a balanced story. Here's an example of one of the ways we've been able to do that. Is a Brazilian coin currently on display at Senate House State Historic Site, part of the Kingston, New Netherlands Third City exhibit installed there, which is a great exhibit and worth seeing. But this amulet has become a way to have a conversation with visitors about the culture of enslaved people and their practices, whether or not it's a daikinga, which is a West African cosmogram, or it was meant to symbolize a Coptic cross. We don't know with absolute certainty. We do know that we are finding indications of West African cosmology and spirituality in other places throughout New York State where enslaved people lived. And that's being reflected in the archaeology. It's being reflected by looking at resources with new eyes. These discoveries, at least the first that I know of, go back to the Lot House in Brooklyn in the 90s with an Archaeology Today article that talked about Africa under the eaves, which talks about finding one of these types of cosmograms in the quarters where enslaved people lived. This is something that completely turns the present day narrative on its head, because the assumption of so many people, once you get over the shock of the fact that there was slavery in New York for a lot of visitors, you can introduce the fact that the enslaved community and the free Black community was holding on to West African culture and transmitting that culture to other people. This is an example of trying to broaden perspectives and to present different perspectives during the same educational program. This photograph was taken during a program at Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site in Albany, which was about the Albany fire of 1793, where a third of the city burned down. And 3 enslaved people, including a young girl who was in her early teens, were accused of setting the fire and were eventually hung and executed. These individuals, all these actors, portrayed different perspectives, different segments of society during that time period to bring the story to life. All the dialogue was pulled and based on stories that appeared in newspaper at the time. And it was a bit of museum theater where you had the European women of the household, the enslaved people of the household, free African American men of color showing up to make deliveries, and the landholding, slave-holding men of the household, all in different areas of the mansion, presenting their perspective on the incidents during that fire, the accusations that had been made, who had been accused, why, and how they were going to be punished and what should happen. We wanted to show that people, even people within bondage, had some sense of knowledge about what was going on, communicated actively about what was happening in their community, were able to gather information, and had a unique perspective on how this would impact them, whether or not this would lead to another crackdown on people's ability to gather because of this incident, whether or not they would be, marginalized even more or lose any sense of agency and choice they had in their lives. And also how callous some of the reactions were at the time. People showing up, and when they found out that there was a temporary delay, a stay of execution for these enslaved people, them being annoyed that they had traveled for several miles with their children to see this execution, and then it wasn't going to happen. It was going to happen at a later time. So I think we tried to use theater as a tool to convey all of this information in a much more palatable way and in a faster way than we could if we had just relied upon documents alone. This program at Kralo State Historic Site is called Pinkster, and Pinkster is a great example of the ability of the enslaved community and the free Black community to take what was available and to turn it into something that served their need. So Pinkster begins as a religious observance under the Dutch, before New York is New York. And during this religious observance, enslaved people are given leave time on their own, essentially time off. And over time, this begins to evolve into a celebration that's infused for this African community with all their own traditions, their dances, their foods, their music, being expressed in a way that they are not allowed to do so during the rest of the year. And it's a wonderful idea of fusion, of you taking what's available, taking what's there and using it to still express yourself, to still express and hold on to your own sense of humanity, even within a terrible situation. This program is from Ganondagan, State Historic Site with Michelle Shenandoah and Neil Powless. One of the things that they reinforce at Ganondagan, which is on the former site of Seneca Village historically, is that Native culture, Indigenous peoples are still very present in our society today. That is not a dead culture, that is a living, breathing, thriving culture. And the programs that they do blend a lot of the arts of the historical Seneca and Haudenosaunee, along with the modern day impact that they've had on American culture. So it's something they're constantly reinforcing, is that when we talk about Indigenous peoples, they are still here. They are still present. They are not a relic of the past. They have shaped American history in many, many ways. And they bring that out at Ganondagan, but they still make it relevant to what's going on and what's happening today. Another major project which took place at Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site was the African Burial Ground Project a number of years ago. Enslaved Africans were found, their remains were found in Menands, New York, outside of Albany. And these remains were found during a construction project. It was not known that they were there. The Schuyler Mansion took part in an effort to properly rebury these individuals with dignity and respect. And artists, students, as you can see pictured here in the slide, craftspeople, poets, all work together to build individual and to decorate individual burial containers, which were reinterred at St. Agnes Cemetery. It was a beautiful ceremony attended by hundreds of people, and the remains lie in state at Schuyler Mansion in the front hall for a day and allowed visitors to come through. So I think in our minds, this was an opportunity for reconciliation. This was one member, even though it's a distant cousin, it was still a member of the Schuyler family who owned the property upon which these individuals were found. It was also an effort to bring people together at a historic site to celebrate the lives and to honor and commemorate these individuals who were never shown this level of dignity and respect during the course of their actual lives. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to Lavada.
Hi, everyone. When I first accepted this position in November of last year, I had a very limited view of what I thought my position or my work would be. As the months have rolled on, I'm almost to my first anniversary. I think the team and I have really experienced a real growth. So I'm just going to go through a few of the projects that I've been directly involved in, and then talk about some of the challenges that we've all faced. In a passing conversation, Yolanda had, Cordell, can we go back a slide, please? In a passing conversation that Yolanda was part of when they were discussing the illumination schedule for Niagara Falls, she asked if the falls could be lit for Juneteenth, and the answer was yes. So we were able to pull together some dialogue around that, lighting the falls in the Pan-African colors, and I was also able to produce a blog post for the Parks blog that explained what the holiday was and how it's celebrated, and gave a lot of information on its history. Cordell, next, please. One of the programs that were already in place when I came in was the interpretive team was adapting a exhibit for suffrage that New York State Museum had done. We were going to create packs to go to all the various regions, and each pack was having a woman of an undertold story added that was from that particular region. As I was sitting in my cubicle reading and trying to figure out my phone, I kept hearing people talk about this. So, and I looked at the information of the women that were being added, and finally I got up and said, excuse me guys, you are aware that not all of these women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. Those conversations led us to adding the slide that you see here, which is an additional panel that breaks down when women of color in the United States gained the right to vote, or people of color gained the right to vote, and the laws enacted over a period of time. Next, please. We knew that the East River Park was going to be renamed. It was not renamed for the person that we were anticipating. The governor actually announced that Marcia P. Johnson was going to be honored with the renaming of this park. I had no idea who this woman was. So I had to go and do research on her like any good, loving historian loves to do. And I discovered a lot of things. The result is the signage that you see here, and the park is actually getting a whole new face. It allowed us to give presence to transgendered women of color. It also made us aware of the current issues that transgender women of color are facing in our country. Next, please. The Parks blog has given me space to do really quick articles on a variety of historic topics, not only Juneteenth, but I did one on the Civilian Conservation Corps colored troops. I did one on Sojourner Truth, and I'm putting together a schedule so that this will be a regular part of the history that's shared that links our parks, and historic sites and environmental centers to the overall history of the state. Next, please. Right after Juneteenth, I was invited to be part of an event that was happening in honor of the installation of a bronze statue that the New York State Suffrage Commission had made by the artist Vinnie Bagwell of Sojourner Truth. In learning about that event, one of the things I discovered was there was no interpretive plan written for this piece of artwork. It was only going to be her name appearing on the skirt, the granite skirt on which the sculpture stands. Even as people were saying that they were learning about her, they had not grasped the importance of interpretive work. So those conversations allowed me to allow the team to craft the sign that you see here that goes into detail about the gown. Vinnie actually used the gown as a canvas, and she's added a lot of historic information relevant to Sojourner Truth's life. We were also able to add a QR code, which then jumps to a digital page, which gives us even more information, not only about the life and work of Sojourner Truth, but also all of the information on the gown. Through my work, initially, I was feeling like I was just reacting to things. But one of the things that I have come to realize is that I am reacting because those within New York State are just becoming aware of my presence. The more work I do, the more people then realize I'm here and available as a resource. And this came up recently when I was asked to be the moderator. I Love New York came to me and asked me to be the moderator on an Underground Railroad panel that they were putting together for the Heritage Trail. And you can now find that on their Facebook page. You can also, one of the things that work did is help them to be aware of me as a resource. So last week, a colleague from the I Love New York reached out to me because they were working on some Halloween material and wanted to find a large scale Halloween event that either was popular with African Americans or that was run by African Americans and their desire to be inclusive. That question allowed us to talk about the placement of Halloween within the African American culture, and then also allowed me to suggest to them, maybe this is not our culture that needs to be shared, but what of those that are Mexican or Latino or Hispanic? So it helped us to think out of a broader, in a much broader way, because we tend to get myopic sometimes when we think about diversity, but we are fortunate that we are in this really great state. Many of these projects and many of the conversations that I've had with my team and with colleagues in general have also created a variety of pink elephants that show up in the room. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're big, sometimes there are a lot of them. Those pink elephants represent moments of tension in our dialogue and in our conversation that we need to address. And I wanted to thank my team for the bravery that they have in being able to do that. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need to keep in mind that we're not talking about, this is not an intellectual exercise. We're looking to change the culture of which we are a part. That brings up issues for all of us. For us to be able to move this work forward, we need to acknowledge the presence of those pink elephants, take a breath, and have those conversations. Those are not conversations that we're having in the larger populace, and they are definitely not conversations that we are accustomed to having in our office space. But there is no way we can move this work forward without doing so. To not acknowledge the pink elephants is to bind us to the past, is to slow down the work. And we really are, and this is one of the things I have really grasped this last year. We really are in the very foundational baby steps of moving DEI work forward. And we can either make that easy or we can bring that to a solid halt. So I want to thank my colleagues for their bravery in being able to acknowledge the difficult conversations that we have to have as we share cultural information, as we all start to understand all the stories, the burdens of the stories that surround our culture. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to wish you all well on your journey and pass on to my colleague, Yolanda Bostic Williams. Thank you.
Thank you, Lavada. Okay, so I have the pleasure of just sharing some of the DEI that we've already accomplished in our agency. And I'm going to begin with our state and national historic register listings. You know, the State Historic Preservation Office here in the state works with, in collaboration with the National Historic Register listings, which is great because we do all the paperwork and then we send it into national. So let's talk about that. Next slide, please, Cordell. Okay, so these are 4 pictures. On the top left is the Colored Musicians Club. Now, this club is located in Buffalo, and in 2019, they received the New York State Historic Preservation Award for Excellence in Historic Documentation. This club was formed in 1917, and the club is one of the oldest continually operating African-American musicians clubs throughout the United States. Additionally, the club served for the office of the Buffalo Local 533, which at the time was an early African-American union of musicians. With the assistance of New York State Parks, the site was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 2018. The top right picture is a photo of a multi-generational picture of the residents and descendants of the Sands neighborhood of Sag Harbor, located on the beach in Long Island. Sands makes up 3 historical African-American adjacent communities in Sag Harbor Hills, Azores and Nineveh. All these are located on the east side of the village. The community was founded between 1947 and 1952 by African-Americans looking to create a summer resort community for themselves during the Jim Crow segregation. In December 2019, Sands was awarded the New York State Historic Preservation Award for Excellence in Historic Preservation Organizational Achievement. Ooh, that was a lot of words. And in the same year, New York State Parks, with the assistance of the National Register, facilitate the listing of the Sands Historic District to the National Register of Historic Places. Park staff continues to work with the community to gain local landmark status for protection of this legacy's community. The bottom left picture, which a lot of you probably already know, is the Stonewall Inn State Historic Site. In 1999, New York State Parks facilitated the listing of Stonewall in the National Registers of Historic Places. This was the first designation of a site dedicated to LGBTQ+ history in the nation. On June 21st in 2016, just days before the 1-year anniversary of the landmark Supreme Court decision guaranteeing marriage equality in all 50 states, Governor Andrew Cuomo designated the Stonewall Inn as a New York State Historic Site. Additionally, on that very same day, President Barack Obama designated the Stonewall Inn and Christopher Park, which sits directly across from the Stonewall, and the surrounding streets and sidewalks that were the site of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising, as a national monument, making it the first official LGBTQ National Park Service site dedicated to telling the story of LGBTQ+ Americans. The bottom right picture is Baynard Rustin. He's a significant yet often little known figure of the Black Civil Rights Movement. He was not only the chief advisor to Martin Luther King Jr., but he was the architect behind the 1963 March on Washington. Due to societal attitudes during the era, Mr. Rustin played a role in the background, often being kept in the shadows because he was gay. In honor of his significant contributions to American history, Rustin's high-rise apartment in 9J, located in the Penn South complex in the West Chelsea section of Manhattan, which he resided from 1962 until his death in 1987, was added to the New York State National Register of Historic Places in 2016. In addition to that, New York State Parks, in collaboration with the New York City LBGT Historic Sites Project, who has been jointly awarded 4 times with underrepresented community grants from the National Park Service to expand scholarship about LGBTQ plus history and facilitate further nominations to the register. New York State leads the nation in the listing of sites significant to LGBTQ plus Americans and remains committed to expanding recognition of all underrepresented individuals and groups who have shaped the diverse landscape of our state and nation. Next slide, please. Okay, which is also wonderful is that in recognizing and honoring individuals that some people may be aware of and some may not, we have opened up new parks, statues, and we have created culturally aware programming. The bottom picture on the left is the mural of Shirley Chisholm at Shirley Chisholm State Park. This park was opened last year in July of 2019 in East Brooklyn, New York. And if you haven't had the chance to go there, you have to. It's gorgeous, okay? This park honors Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who was a 7-term Congresswoman, in addition to being the first Black woman to run for president. The second picture is Marcia P. Johnson State Park, which is what Lavada mentioned a little bit about. This past August, I should say, it was formerly named the East River State Park. And on Marcia's 75th birthday, we dedicated this park to Marcia P. Johnson, and we renamed it. She was the first transgender woman of color, a pioneer of the LGBT civil rights movement, and a prominent figure in the Stonewall uprising. This park is the first state park in New York to honor LGBTQ plus person and transgender woman of color. The third pitch, oh no, that's going to be on the next slide, but wait, Cordell. We also unveiled, as Lavada shared, a 7-foot bronze statue of the abolitionist and suffragist Sojourner Truth. We unveiled this over the walkway over the Hudson State Historic Park, which is located in Ulster County. And we also unveiled it to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the women's suffrage movement. And if you haven't had a chance to go to that park either, please go. It's gorgeous, especially in the fall. The views are just incredible, and Sojourner's statue is just breathtaking. And then, you know, to honor our fellow brothers and sisters, we also have the Pride Outside campaign. Since New York State remains a beacon for the nation and recognizing and honoring the importance of our LGBTQ community and its contributions throughout the state and the world, we just celebrated our 50th anniversary of the inaugural Pride March and launched our Pride Outside campaign and a hashtag in New York State parks. Next slide, please, Cordell. Okay, these are some of my favorite pictures of the Sojourner Truth statue. The picture on the left is artist Vinnie Bragwell, and she is standing next to Corey McLeachy, who happens to be the 6th generational grandson of Miss Sojourner. And then the picture to the right is the beautiful statue, which you have to go and don't forget to look at the back, her skirt on the back. It's just absolutely breathtaking. It tells its own story. Next slide, please. Okay, and before I get to our all are welcome here messaging, I just want to let you know that New York State Parks and Historic Sites also has been really working hard to remove barriers to access. And we have several programs to assist in removing these barriers. Our first one is the Connect Kids to Parks. This program provides transportation grants for from kindergarten to 12th grade. And this allows these children to visit our state parks and historic sites. And since its inception a couple of years ago, we have welcomed over 300,000 school-aged children to our parks, historic sites, and environmental centers. Then we also have the First Time Camper program, which provides free equipment and instructions to welcome new campers. We all know for all you who camp, we know how expensive that can be. So we're trying to help out with that and introduce people to our parks. We also have the foster family program. Unfortunately, because of COVID, a lot of these programs were unable to occur this year. But however, the foster family program is a collaboration with New York State Parks and the New York State Office of Children and Families. And what this program does is that it provides free access passes to foster families throughout the state, which is pretty great. And last year in 2019, we were able to provide 500 passes to foster families throughout the state, which is awesome. And I really hope COVID doesn't get in the way of us doing this next year. Fingers crossed. Then we also have the Golden Park Program Pass, which provides free weekday access to our parks and sometimes reduced fees to our historic sites for all seniors. And you don't even need to carry anything or a card. You just have to show your license or your non-driver's license at the entrance of our parks and sites. And then we also have an Access Pass program, which provides free entry and reduced fees to certain individuals with disabilities. And we also extended that pass for lifetime benefits for veterans with service-connected disabilities. And lastly, we have our Learn to Swim program, which we were able to do. I believe we started that in mid-July when all the pools and everything opened up. And the Learn to Swim program provides free introductory swim lessons to children throughout the state. And while I have you, please don't forget to download our New York State Parks Explorer app. It's fantastic. You can list all the parks are there. You can favorite. It will even tell you when parks are closed due to capacity, like we saw this summer. Okay, next slide, please, Cordell. Oh, no, that's it. Nope, go back one. I'm sorry. You were already on the page. And lastly is our all are welcome here message. We are trying to expand our access and let all individuals know that parks and historic sites are spaces that are welcoming to all. We will be coming out with a logo for this, and it's going to be all over our parks and historic sites, whether they're posters, flags, you name it. And like the slide says, to ensure all visitors to New York parks and historic sites feel welcome and that they belong in our facilities. Parks has unveiled an all are welcome here message to promote inclusion to our parks and respond to incidents of bias, hate, and discriminations in our facility. So thank you for listening. This is our presentation. We want to thank you, Ronnie, and Travel Summit. And I'd like to thank my colleagues for assisting me in this presentation today. We look forward to working with Travel Unity on our DEI efforts and as well as yours. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.